Mama, is God real?
Is marriage for life?
Do we have to be baptized?
Is drinking really wrong?
Well, that's your interpretation.
Where do I come from?
Do we really have to have authority for what we do?
Where is God when I need Him?
Rise up, O men of God. His kingdom tarries long. Bring in the day of brotherhood and in the night of wrong.
Hello, friends, and welcome again to the Shield of Faith. My name is Wes Garland, and I am the preacher of the Northwest Church of Christ in Clay County, Tennessee. And alongside with us, as always, we have Scott Gann.
Hey, Wes.
He is the preacher of the Philippi Church of Christ in Thompsonville, Kentucky. And alongside with us, as always, we also have Eric Pitcock.
Hey, Wes.
He is the preacher of the Gamaliel Church of Christ in Gamaliel, Kentucky. And for the next 30 minutes, friends, we hope and pray that you'll take out your Bible, paper, and pen, and we'll study with us about the subject which is at hand, because we are in our fourth and final lesson in the four-part series in dealing with marriage, divorce, and remarriage. And if you've been following with us, we have dealt with basically God's law of marriage. We've dealt with God's law in relation to marriage, divorce, and remarriage. We've even talked about a little bit about the false arguments that people make for marriage, divorce, and remarriage. And today, friends, what we're going to be discussing are basically the consequences, because I don't think a lot of people really understand this. There are consequences that come from divorce.
As a direct result of divorce, consequences come.
Exactly.
It's not God's plan, as we looked at. From the beginning, it was not so. It was one man, one woman till death. And, with the one exception that we talked about, and even in that one exception, you need to do all that you can do to retain the structure of the home. But every time there is divorce, there is sin.
That's right.
And, so when there's sin, there's consequences of sin. And so we see these consequences trickle down through the home as we see divorce going on, especially at the rate it's going on today. 50% of every marriage ends in divorce. We talked about 75% of those afterwards end in divorce. After you've been divorced one, you get dull. You get, your respect for God's authority on marriage. You loosen that, and then so it just continues to grow from there. And I've worked in the school systems, and I've seen broken homes, and I've seen the results of children that are in these fractured homes and dysfunctional families, and it's terrible. I feel for kids that are in these situations.
And I think it's really sad, though, whenever you have the children that are suffering with the split in the home.
Right.
They're so torn against the moms and the dads. One weekend they might be over here, and then the next weekend they're over here, and going back and forth. All of a sudden their moms and dad get remarried and all this other stuff. Now they're having to deal with stepmothers and stepfathers, things of that nature. I'm telling you, I've even seen it myself. I've even had a friend who's been in that situation. And I'm telling you, you can just tell how dysfunctional the child becomes.
Right.
And all these things. I mean, just think about this. Going back to Matthew 19, dealing with what we've been discussing on the marriage situation. From the very beginning, he says that it's going to be one man, one woman for life. And even at this extent, he does not mention, that there's not going to be any problems.
No.
He does not say that there's not going to be situations which is going to be very, very hard.
Right.
All right. He says that one woman, one man for life.
Right.
And divorce was not ever in the mind of God.
No.
Right.
But it's because, and this is going to be leading into our first point, in dealing with that sin is present in every divorce.
That's exactly right.
That's right.
Sin comes upon the divorce because divorce comes and was basically originated by man.
Yeah.
Right.
You get a divorce for any reason. I mean, you get a divorce.
There's a sin
That's
there.
right.
There's a sin there.
Because you're breaking
Just
God's
the thought
law.
of divorce.
Yeah, you don't like one another. Well, you don't like one another, then it's a sin to have not loved one another more
Right.
to have made it work.
Right.
Exactly.
If you get a divorce even for the cause of fornication, which is we don't want to overstress. That God has a law. He wants us to be together, one man, one woman for life. That's what God wants.
Right.
And He does give the exception.
Right.
In the case of fornication, specific fornication, you have then the opportunity to put that fornicating spouse away and marry again. But even in that situation, sin is involved.
Right.
But you know, one thing that I keep on saying all the time is whenever people are thinking about marriage, divorce is already in their mind. It's in their
Right.
vocabulary.
For a lot of people, it is.
And
It is,
I'm
guys.
telling you, we would not have this whole 50% of the divorce rate if it wasn't already in the minds of people before they even got
You
married.
know, that's a scary statistic, isn't
It
it?
is.
That every other person that gets married is going to end in divorce.
Yeah.
You know, that's something that should shock our nation and, well, the world into understanding the ramifications for this and all the trickling down things that result from this, that we're not going to, you know, and we look at the home. You know, this starts in the home. This is a basic foundation and building block of
Yeah.
society. The home is. Each individual home builds the nations.
Yeah.
You know,
So goes the home, so goes the
right.
nation.
If the
That's
home-
so goes the church. You know,
That's
because
right.
because the very first thing that God ordained, He instituted the home.
That's right.
That's right.
And so that's what we're talking
the
about.
foundation for everything.
It's the foundational principle for everything. And so here comes along man wanting to dissolve. And it says in Matthew chapter 19 and verse 6, so you'll no longer be one, or no longer be two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no man put asunder.
That's right.
So man is putting asunder something when it comes to divorce. And so whenever man tries to usurp God's authority, so be it, as you would say, then consequences of this act of divorce, act of sin, it's just going to be contrary to what God
That's right.
has.
You know, it never works out better for us to follow Satan.
No.
It never,
never
works
has.
out. You know, even if it is the case that it appears that things are easier for us in this life, which they may very well be,
Right.
ultimately, in the end, it will not be the best choice.
Right.
No.
Because we'll have to we'll lose our soul as a result of it.
Well, we got to ask ourselves the question: is God going to lead us down a road that's going to be hard to bear, a lot of burdens, all these other things?
Well, there's certainly going to be things that's going to be difficult,
Yes.
but there isn't anything, according to 1 Corinthians, there isn't anything
Right.
of which
That
I
we
am
can't-
going to be facing that the Lord hasn't made provisions that
That's
I
right.
can get out of that situation
Exactly.
and avoid temptation.
Exactly.
You know, Satan has his fingers in everything.
He does.
And he will manipulate and use every excuse and everything that he has within his grasp to try to make divorce appealing and the thing to do, and but it's not.
Right.
And it affects. You know, some people think, well, this only affects me.
Right.
You know, it only affects me. But I mean, divorce, in my opinion, is worse than any death.
It is.
That's right.
I mean, it really is.
It is.
That's it.
Because, you know, in a case of divorce, it's not like the person just died. That person passed away, and you had a good relationship, and you appreciated that person.
Right.
And in the case of divorce, it's almost worse than a death.
Right.
First of all, you're putting to death something that you and God made a commitment to keep
Right.
for as long as you lived. And when you put that to death, it is like a death. It's
Right.
it's like a funeral.
Right.
And
it replays
and it-
itself over and over.
And that's what
Because
makes
you
it so
see-
bad.
Right. It's not like a death, a physical death, because that's I mean, it's hard to accept, but that takes place and it happens. Okay, you move on, you can go on. In a divorce, in a case, sometimes it's difficult to move on because you continue have contact with that person, you have children involved, and all the things around it.
And then you
it's
see-
just like casting a stone in the creek or in a pond or something, and the ripples, you know, all I did is throw a small
little
stone
stone.
into the thing, but the ripples
Yeah.
continue to go out.
And then-
that's what the divorce.
Whenever we look at this whole entire situation and just dealing with divorce, you know, sin is in every case, but let's go ahead and start talking about how sin is in every case
Right.
in dealing with divorce. I mean, just think about it for a second. Just the thought itself, having the mindset of saying, okay, I want a divorce or I'm thinking about a divorce, comes from a mindset of basically having a disregard for God's law.
Right.
I mean, that's sin number one.
Right.
Yeah.
And just think about the attitudes that come along with a divorced mate. I mean, it doesn't have good attitudes but come along with it.
You know, it builds anger, animosity toward one another. It makes you do things that you wouldn't typically or normally do. You know, I've seen people that you perceive that they're doing well. They're doing well, and then they get a divorce, and one, I mean, it's just like they go crazy.
Yeah.
They almost go insane, it seems like, because they're doing things and participating in things and involving themselves in things that you would have never begin to imagine them doing prior to getting this divorce.
You know, Scott, God has given the male and the female. He has given us instruction as to what our responsibility and our requirements are. He has given the male in Ephesians chapter 5, he has given us to be the head. We're the spiritual leader. As we follow Christ, we lead our family spiritually. We lead them an example in this life physically as we try to provide for them. And then in turn, the wife is to be in subjection to the husband. She's to rule her home or to be a keeper of her home. You know, so we have responsibilities, and there are many of those that we could go over. We don't have time, but we have responsibilities. And I would submit that sin is always the result of one or both parties not committing themselves to those responsibilities. And when a husband doesn't love his wife like he needs to, then that is subject to cause fraction and division and problems in the relationship that will ultimately end in divorce. So we can't stress enough for individuals to look to the law of God, to look to the Bible, for a man to stand up, be a man, and fulfill his obligations as a father.
You know, the standard a lot of times today is Hollywood. You know, we're bombarded by the society that we glamour. I mean, you know, people glamorize the people that's in Hollywood, and they have little to no respect for God's authority. I mean, people are divorced all the time. I mean, they spit in the face of God, in a sense, spiritually speaking. And people look up to these people. You know, younger kids, they look up to these stars, and then they see when they get older that they're involved in all these different things. They start marrying, they start divorcing, they start marrying, and it kind of desensitized everybody to the point that, you know, we're kind of accepting this standard. And the majority, as we talked about just even in the statistics, whenever out of every other marriage ends in divorce, I think we're letting people dictate to us the standard of marriage or divorce, as we're talking about today, that it is okay. There's nothing wrong with it. We see people doing it all the time. You know, hey, the statistics say, you know, every other person is going to get a divorce. Well, it might as well be me. You know, I've got to love myself. The odds are not
in my favor.
You know, we think of divorce. It results not only from a situation where people neglect their responsibilities as a father or as a husband and a wife, but you know, you also think of how that because of divorce, it really is a selfish individual, because you know they're really just seeking to serve themselves. You know, they have omitted God from the equation. They don't want God to legislate on their happiness. You know, they want to be happy, and so their happiness, they conclude, means that I've got to get rid of this person. Well, you know, we don't not be so selfish. And, you know, we ought to try to work through our problems.
I mean, the whole fornication, which is the only exception for divorce, comes upon the selfishness of the one who wanted something extra out of the marriage, and that going out on his own wife or her own husband. It's the selfishness part of it. I mean, is not sin every single bit of it selfishness?
That's right. And even to the case where there is a fornicator in the marriage, why was that person going out and fornicating? Could it be that there was sin on their spouse's part, and that they was withholding themselves from that physical relationship?
They were intolerable to be around. You know, there's some people out there that, and I try to be loving and as caring and compassionate on others. But there's a lot of people out there that I don't want to be around. I mean, and if they've got a spouse, you know, they probably don't want to be around them.
Well, Solomon even made the plea there in the book of Proverbs that it's better to stand on the rooftop
Right.
than in the house of a contentious woman.
That's right.
Right. That's right.
I mean, if a
You know,
woman
it's-
is contentious according to the spouse,
Nobody wants to be around that
nobody
kind of
wants to be
person.
around that.
You know, nobody, and that's sin.
That's
Exactly.
right.
You know,
That's
and
sinful
if
behavior.
divorce was the result of that situation, it was because of sin.
Exactly.
You know, and it was because of sin that it ended up them being in a sinful situation.
Right.
That's right. Well, let's go on now to
I
the
do wanna-
situation
I do
of
wanna-
children.
Right. Well, children.
I mean,
you know,
you're a testimony of this.
right.
How is that affecting your children?
Well, it's affecting my children, of course, in a large degree for the situation that we're in. But you know, I got out of it because it was the right thing to do.
You got out of an unscriptural marriage.
I got out of an
marriage.
unscriptural marriage that, you know, John the Baptist would have told me it's not lawful for me to have
Right.
my wife.
Exactly.
And I reacted differently than the way Herod did. I
Right.
said, "You're right," because I know I'm amenable to whosoever in verses 19, Matthew 19:9, and so I had to get out of an unscriptural marriage. You know, I see anytime it's involved, and there was sin involved in my situation, I had to get out of it, so consequences came down. You know, my children are in a dysfunctional family. You know, all I can do is do what the Lord wants me to do and try to salvage my relationship with them and providing for them and taking care of them. But, you know, it's difficult. It's hard. But it's a result of sin. You know, the consequences of sin has trickled out, like we say.
Yeah.
You know, Eric said earlier, you know, some people say, well, I'm just involved in it. It's just me. Yeah, it's me. But it's not. It's not just you. And
You know, some people would want you
the ripples of the water,
you know,
like
so-
with a small stone.
Yeah.
You know, it goes out. But if people had this mentality and understand this from Colossians chapter 3, it says that we've got to put to death certain things, and
Yes,
we've got to put on certain things.
That's right.
And if you could turn that text, I think if everybody could understand this principle, it would help us to be able to not be involved in this divorce, and it wouldn't plague our heart. But this is the way it's supposed to be. Therefore, put to death, it says, your members on earth, fornication, uncleanness, evil passions, covetous, and idolatry. These things cause the wrath of God to come upon the sons of the disobedient, in which you yourself once were and walked in them and lived in them. These are people that came out of these things
Right.
because they put to death those. That's what Romans chapter 6 and verses 4, you got to put to death. You know, don't let sin reign in your mortal body. So they put these things to death. And it says, in verses 8, it says, but now you yourselves are put off in these things: anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy language out of your mouth. Do not lie to one another. Put off the old man. But it says, here's what it says, and put on the new man, which is renewed by the knowledge according to the image of him that created him, whether Jew, Greek, anybody, it doesn't matter. And in verse 12 it says, therefore, as God's elect, holy and beloved, put on tender mercies. Now this is, I think, if you put these things on, it's going to help to resolve a lot of this divorce problem. Put on tender mercies,
You know,
kindness,
Scott,
humility, meekness, long-suffering, bearing with one another, forgiving one another. And if anyone has a complaint against you, even as Christ forgave you, do also.
That's right.
And above all these things, put on love, the bond of perfectionness. Let the peace of God rule your hearts, which you also call to one body. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. Now, if you put on these things here, that will help you to overcome. You know, that'll help you to stay married and not end up in a divorce. What we're trying to do for this program is see the consequences of divorce. And if you're in a marriage, and it's a scriptural marriage, we want to scare you. We want to scare you from getting a divorce. And if you can do these, put on these elements or these attributes that Christ would like you to have, you know, we could stem the tide of divorce rate.
Absolutely.
And that's
You know,
what we want to do. We
you know,
want to try to
Scott-
help.
Scott, you know, we have our culture has diminished the social contract that we have with each other.
Right.
And what happens is we, it used to be that a man's word was his bond.
Right.
You tell somebody something, and that's the way it was. Well, we have these social contracts. We shake each other's hand. That's a social contract. Well, we also have the marriage. The marriage is a social contract.
Right.
You have a contract between you and your wife and with God. Now, it could be the case that that's just as good as you need. It's just your word between one another and with God.
Right.
But we have the situation where the civil law comes in, and we are married, according to the civil law. But anyway, we have these social contracts. Whenever we break these, it desensitizes us to the point, and then it's not so easy or hard to break the next social contract.
Right.
In other words, if I'm a person that lies and I tell you, Wes or Scott, that I'm going to be at a certain place and then I don't, well, it just becomes easy for me to just go around lying all the time.
Right.
And so it's the same case that we see in divorce. When people get divorced, what happens in the next marriage? It's easier to get divorced. That's why the divorce rate goes from 50 to 75%.
Right.
And so that comes into play in that we just diminish our appreciation for our word, our honesty.
Right.
Because we have to understand we have made a commitment to one another. And when our children sees this, well, they look at us and say, well, my mom and dad, they were supposed to be committed to one another, but they broke their word.
Right.
They broke their contract with one another. They broke the contract with God.
So what then
And they
is that
also
teaching
look
them?
at this parent.
And so it trickles down
What
to the children.
does that teach them?
And-
That's what I'm saying. They look at their parents and see that they didn't, and I'll tell you what, a lot of children, they think that they are the ones that caused the divorce.
And it
you know
affects
what?
them.
That
is
affects a child like no other.
It does. I tell you what, my parents were divorced, and it affected me. I got to look within myself. What did I do to cause this? And I'm a product of this type of lifestyle. I'm a product of divorce. My parents were divorced, and I've lived through that, and I can look at it from the standpoint how it affected me, and all these things.
I can about bet you that a lot of people came to you, even your mom and dad, saying that you were not the problem.
Yes, they did.
Okay.
They did.
Was it still hard for yourself to be persuaded in that?
Yes, it was. It was. And you know what? For people to place that burden by their actions, place that burden on children, it's wrong. And from a child from that I did believe that there was something I did, because that's just the way we do. When something goes wrong, we try to say, well, what we do. And to put that on an innocent child, that's just wrong.
I mean, I just want you to think about the other ways in which a child is reared in, because not only is a child affected by them thinking that they were the reason for the divorce.
They're affected sociologically.
But I mean,
they're affected.
Their friends,
mentally, as far as what it does to their minds and how they think. And
have you ever thought about
them.
this? A lot of the children that are in the detention centers is a result of broken homes, of them never having a father in the home,
Right.
and all those other things. Do you think that started with them not having a structured home?
It goes back to the degrading factor of the home. The home has been degraded. And
they're making all those bad decisions.
God knew what He was doing when He established the home.
Exactly.
That's right.
He knew what He was doing
in Genesis 23
That's right.
and 24.
He
knew what He was doing.
When He created man, He created woman, and He put them together, and He made one flesh. He made a home that was to be rearing children. He knew that Adam needed a helpmeet.
Right.
And it's hard and difficult for a father like yourself, Scott, to raise children without a helpmeet. And so we have
God knows what He's talking about.
He knows what He's talking about. And whenever a home is absent of one of the other, it makes it difficult. The Bible says, children, obey your parents.
It didn't say one of your
parents. It didn't say one of your parents.
Or your step-parents.
Right.
Or your, It
was parents.
Right.
And so, one of the things that we learn from sociology is that children learn behavior from their parents.
Right.
And like, for example, a daughter If the father is in the home, that daughter is watching the father, and she's learning things, and she's picking up things. And whether or not we realize it or not, that daughter will go out one day, and she'll probably find another man or a fella that is similar to her father. That's why we see this repetitious pattern in the lives of individuals.
This vicious cycle is what they
That's
call
right.
it.
Even in the sad state of, have you ever noticed, whenever a woman is married to an abusive husband, that the child
Goes out and marries.
goes out and marries somebody who's also abusive because, I mean, they don't know any different.
That's what they have saw. That's what they have picked up through their life. Whether or not they realize it or not, that's what happens, and it becomes a vicious cycle.
So the
You know,
parents
you-
need to
you can do-
understand.
You can do genograms with people in their past, you know, and show where there's been fractured and divorces, you know, and you can see it. It's just like
It
it
causes
just
problems.
spreads.
Yeah.
It just pyramids
You know,
from there.
it leads
you know.
to,
it leads to a desensitizing of divorce, and they see that. That's what they're going to. You know, that's what they're going to imitate. They're not going to have any respect for the marriage bond. Children aren't,
You know what-
if their parents
You go
don't.
back to that genogram, Scott. One of the things you'll see is if you do a genogram with individuals and look at their history and going back in time,
Yeah.
you'll find that those occasions where there was divorce, there was a higher risk of depression, there was a higher risk of drug abuse, alcohol abuse,
Right.
physical abuse. There was almost an immediate, in the very next generation, their children, there was an immediate effect
Right.
on those children as a result of that divorce. And all those things increased dramatically.
It's like a pyramid.
Yeah.
It flows out. It's just like what I said earlier about, you know, I see people that are married, you think they're doing well, and they get a divorce, and I don't know, they lose their mind. They're going places they ought not go into. They're living lifestyles they ought not live. And you wouldn't dream of those people living that type of lifestyle. But when you sin and you divorce, it just causes some people just to lose their mind.
That's right. And all the while, the children are the most innocent victims
Right.
of this
That's right.
whole
and they're
thing.
being pawned
and they're
off.
probably they're
They're
affected
being
the
pawned
most.
off on anybody that will keep them and watch them, and
So-
it's just
so
it's a
basically-
terrible situation.
So basically, what we really need to get into the minds of our viewers today is that your actions
Affects everybody.
affects everybody around you.
It
And I'm
certainly
even
does.
talking about ourselves, guys. I
Right.
mean, us and our marriages. Every decision we make, every action that we do, affects everybody.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, friends, we want to tell you that just because we're saying that there are consequences in dealing with divorce, if you are finding yourself in an adulterous marriage, that does not give you any excuse
Right.
to not give it up.
Right.
There is no excuse at all. If you want to get to heaven, you've got to do the things that
It's
you
not
need
lawful
to
for
do.
them to have that
not
person.
It's not
They have to
lawful
do what
for
you
them.
did, Scott.
Right.
They have to do.
That's
and,
right.
and take Scott as a good example. If he did it, you can do it as well.
Right.
And we are here to strengthen you and do whatever we can for you. If there's anything we can do for you in just talking or just, you know, counseling or whatever it might be, please just call us.
Right.
We want to help you. We love you. But until next time, thank you so very much for watching. May God bless. Just think about it.